Or, all right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're doing fantastic. Today, we're going to start soon. We're live streaming from the rest of the world. Just gonna switch the cameras a little bit, and you can see the three main guys over there. Yep. Yep. What's that? Oh, we're right where you are.
All right, hello everybody. Thank you a lot for joining us here tonight. This is a public input session. It's our first crack at this, but we think it's super important that the public participate in the future of Alberta. Who agrees with me on that one? So tonight what participation means is not throwing tomatoes and old fruits and vegetables. We'll save that for after the Constitutional Convention. But tonight is going to be if you have any ideas for the Constitutions, concerns about things you've heard in the past, comments, and even some questions. We have a good stack of these, so if you're still working on yours, just raise your hand on a card, a volunteer will bring it to you, and then get it over to me. And if we don't get to yours, don't worry, it will still get to the men, because they'll be taking notes and paying attention to what you guys have in mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce the three gentlemen, but before that, a little bit of housekeeping. We got some exits here and there, one here as well, and 2 washrooms. So if you don't fit into one of those 2, this is not going to work for you. I apologize. And I want to make sure that you all have a good time tonight. There's some water, and I'm being told to move. I don't like instructions. I don't like direction. I want libertarian, sorry. There's free coffee and water over there. Donations are welcome. This was a by donation event, so thank you very much to everybody who did that. And we do want to do more of these, so the next one's going to be in Red Deer tomorrow night, and then we'll be in Calgary. And you know everything about what's going to happen in this process. Good, there's no liars here. Fantastic. Nobody knows, okay? That's why we're doing these. And this is why we're having a constitutional conversation at this stage. Here we got Bruce Pardy, who we flew in from Ontario. He's been on the Levine Show many, many times, and we'll keep doing that. Dennis Kalma as well. And Matt Rowley. Did I hear a boo? Who booed? That was me, sorry. But what we're going to do tonight is get some of your feedback, put it together, and then we're going to do it multiple times, because every one of these gentlemen said the same thing when I reached out to them about doing this. They're like, that's a great idea. I have an open mind. I want to see where we go with this. My mind changes frequently as we get more feedback, so the more feedback, the better. And also the big star, all of you. Thanks for being here tonight. Give yourself a hand. So let's go ahead and get this started. They're going to give you a couple minutes about who they are, a little bit about why they're here, why they flew all the way here, drove all the way up here, and is hanging out with us tonight. So we'll start with Bruce.
Is it working? There we go. Great. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for the invitation to join you. Jason, as Jason says, I am the interloper from Ontario. It's great to be here. Part of the reason that I'm so interested in seeing Alberta become independent is that you have a moment. You have a moment that doesn't come along in the lives of civilizations very often. And the moment is very short. When the moment arrives, you need to do whatever it is that you want to do. And if you don't, the moment will be done. Right? So it's very important to think through what kind of a civilization you want to have. And the fact of the matter is that Alberta has a chance to really do something. I mean, for Albertans, of course, and maybe even for the country, but for that matter, for the sake of Western civilization. Because as you all know, the thing is unraveling, and things have gone off track, and you have the opportunity to put it back on and to describe and demonstrate to the rest of the world how this is supposed to go. So this is all in preparation for approaching that moment. And I'm delighted to be here along with my friends to talk about this. I mean, we disagree, not entirely. There's a lot of things we do agree about, for sure. We disagree about the details and the premises, perhaps, of our different models. I want to offer you, just very quickly, 2 dangers in this process, and then maybe a principle if I have time. Here are the 2 dangers. Number 1, the temptation when it comes to a constitution is to do this, to imagine the society that you want to have, the objective, the goal, the vision. Here's what I want to, here's the society I want to live in. And then to go back to the Constitution and try and design it. Here's the danger. That's what we're trying to escape. We are trying to escape planning, design, central control, manipulation that governments right now exercise to achieve their vision. We don't want social engineering. We want a constitution that reflects a set of principles. And so instead of trying to imagine how you want people to behave, make it smaller. What principles do you believe in? On those principles, the document should be based. That's the first danger. Second danger is this. It's very easy to think of sentiments or ideas or values that you think should be reflected in the Constitution. But in the law and in constitutions, the most important question is not what, it is who. Not what the substance is, but who gets to decide. And so my point is this: it is not enough to take a sentiment, an idea, a value, and say, oh, well, let's write that down in the document. A thing that is written in the document is no guarantee that that is what you will get, because there are powerful players inside the state that will have control over what those words mean. And so it is more important for a constitution to have a sound architecture, as in who makes these decisions? How are they selected? What is the boundary of their authority? How long are they in the position? Have we managed to avoid a concentration of power? Those are architectural questions. And they are, if anything, more important than the question of the what. You know, what value should it be? What should the rights be? And those kinds of questions. So just please keep those 2 ideas in mind. And I've talked long enough, so I'll pass it over.
Yeah, so we do. It's a good thing he advocates for term limits, or we would have been here for a while. Let's go ahead and have Dennis Kalma come up.
Good evening, and I'd like to echo what Jason and what Bruce has said. Thank you all for coming out. It's really important to me to hear what you guys think and discuss with you. Because one thing that I've learned in my journey towards independence over the last year is a lot of the things I thought I knew were true and things that I really wanted, maybe I just don't understand them well enough. And there's smarter minds and better heads that can say, yeah, but what about this? Have you considered this option? Have you considered this approach? So I'm very interested in what all of you have to say. In terms of my background, I was the principal author behind The Value of Freedom, a fiscal plan for an independent Alberta. I also now am heavily engaged with Keith Wilson and the Alberta Transition Council. I am pulling together the transition plan, which we hope to release at the end of July. And that will cover how do we get from being a province as part of Canada to being an independent country, everything from courts to airports to military to policing to banks to debt to assets, you name it. So that'll be here by the end of July roughly. So working on that. The third element, and this really epitomizes my little journey, I was the author, the editor behind the Alberta Prosperity Project's constitutional draft. If you would have asked me in December, I would have said, release it, release it, release it, release it. Get it out there, get people talking about it. Well, my thinking has matured on that. I've learned, courtesy of Matt, courtesy of Bruce, that the whole idea of constitutions is more nuanced and more complex than I ever thought. Bruce said it perfectly. It's about the principles. It's about the who's. Who decides? How do they get to the point where they can have control of you? How do we minimize the impact government has on our lives? All those things are complex. And I realize that there is more than one choice here. And us three at the front are three different choices. My particular favorite is a constitutional republic, and that's what's in draft today from my pen. What I'm very interested in now is, first of all, what are your thoughts on those things? And second of all, how do we decide? I am most concerned, and I'm very interested to hear, and I posed it to one gentleman before this meeting started, is, okay, let's say you understand all three options. There's 5 million of us. How do we make up our minds? How do we not piss off every other Albertan that disagrees with us? How do we get to that outcome where you can all say, yep, this is the best for us for now and in the future? So I'm very interested in any commentary, hopefully in the questions that people can have and that we can learn. So thank you all for coming out again, and look forward to talking further.
I'm going to use that line. I wasn't wrong. I matured in my thinking. I like that a lot. That was going to work great. Paula can hear that one. I matured in my thinking. Yeah. Right. I got a heckler out of my own family. All right. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. Everybody please stand for the Honorable Matt Rowley.
Why, thank you. Dr. Matthew Rowley. I'm a fifth-generation Albertan, and I can remember a time, and I'm not that old, when Alberta worked. And when we can go back and say things were better than they are now. It didn't take revolutionizing everything. It didn't take having to burn down the whole system and rebuilding it. What it did take was less Ottawa and more us. And that used to be the principle in Alberta. So I got involved in the whole independence movement because I said to myself, Alberta has what it needs. We don't need dramatic change. We just need to cut off Ottawa. And that's what I want to see done. I don't think we need to unmake all that has been done before us. And I think to respect what we had in Canada and what was betrayed after Pierre Elliott Trudeau and his like got a hold of this country is worth doing. The people who fought and died overseas for Canada fought and died for something that is being betrayed today, and it's not by us. So we need to do what it takes to create an independent, free Alberta that actually has the values, the principles, and the past, the greatness that was Canada, but here and now. And in a way, we will be preserving the best, the brightest, and the most hopeful of Canada. When we talk constitutional models, I love a Westminster system, and I always love to point out that since Pierre Elliott Trudeau, what we've been living in is actually a French Republic wearing the Westminster system like a freaky skin suit from Silence of the Lambs. So don't think that what I advocate for is that we should continue with what we have today, because what we have today is an abomination as far as Westminster goes. But we do have the model, we do have the plan, we do have the way, and it's with just rewinding a little bit and then taking a different path rather than having to burn it down and start new. But what I appreciate about this group and why it's important to be here with you guys too is if we can dialogue as friends. We don't have to hate each other because we're different. We don't have to hurt each other because we don't like what we say. But we can think, we can talk, and we can listen. And that's how we make real change.
All right, so if you have any questions on your cards, just raise your cards. Volunteers will bring it out throughout. No, it's not open mic, so just write it on the card and we'll get it to you. And as our Honorable Judge Judy said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So these guys are here to listen. Cheers. Max, are we good with the camera? All right, so I got the honor of going through all your cards, and it doesn't look like you have a lot of doctors here, so I can read this. I'll be able to get through this. And if your card doesn't get used tonight, don't worry, it will be passed to the gentleman, so everything you've written down will get to the gentleman, and they'll be able to, mature their thinking, as Dennis likes to say here. I'm going to start with one of the ones that came into the door right at the very beginning, and this one comes up a lot. How can you create a constitution based on all people being granted equal rights when you have a minority who will have extra normal rights? I'm talking about First Nation people. How do we ensure that we don't have a minority group that has the rights that supersedes the rights of everyday citizens, particularly if we assume the treaty rights set out in Treaty 6, 7, and 8? I'm not advocating that their treaty rights should be in the way of, but I'm wondering how we can avoid situations like we have now, since we're using courts to challenge every decision, it seems. Let's go ahead and start on the far right with Bruce.
All right. This is one of my favorite questions. In my opinion, in an independent Alberta, Aboriginal rights should not exist. Because the idea of equality under the law, equal protection of the law, is one of the principles upon which the Constitution should be built. And if you immediately have an exception, then you have violated your own principle right off the bat. Now, sometimes people ask, well, but how can you do that? Because there are treaties, and there's a Constitution. Section 35 says that treaty rights and Aboriginal rights are guaranteed. And many of the laws in Canada, many of the events in Canada's legal history predated Confederation. It's established in Canadian law that these rights exist. And the answer is, no, you don't understand what independence is. Independence is a repudiation of the existing constitutional order. It is true that Aboriginal rights are guaranteed in the Canadian Constitution under Section 35. And there is very little you can do about that unless you amend the Constitution. But that is not what we're talking about. You are talking about leaving the Constitution and starting again with a blank slate, a clean table, where you sit down in a group and say, how do we want this society to work? And that means you can start from scratch. Now, there is a negotiation to happen, assuming the referendum is successful. Well, not just this referendum, but the next referendum, whenever it happens to happen. But let's assume we get there. There's a negotiation to happen between Alberta and the rest of Canada. The question of Aboriginal rights will undoubtedly come up. But it's a negotiation, and Alberta can take whatever negotiating position it decides that it wants. And one of those positions, in my opinion, ought to be that everybody in the new Alberta is legally equal.
So this is one of those areas where Matt, Bruce, and I are in complete agreement. We do not want to see differential rights for any group or any individual at all. One person, one vote, full stop. So the minor difference I have with Bruce on this, and perhaps with Matt, is in my mind those treaties are contracts. We made agreements in good faith many, many years ago. Alberta will inherit those good faith agreements. We want to be a good faith land. And we want to sit down with the people with whom those contracts were made, the First Nations people, and say, look, this isn't working anymore. The Indian Act is an abomination. The fact you are wards of the state is obscene. And the fact that there's chiefs exerting powers over the rest of us purely because they think they can. That has to go away. But what can be kept is that we can make you full citizens. We can make you participate in society. We can give you your lands. We can give you your reserves. I have no problem with that. Complete with mineral rights. I have no issue with that. And then we'll sit down and say the trade goods and the farm implements and the cash, those to be paid out every year in perpetuity, as long as the sun shines and the rivers flow, let's figure out how to pay that out. I did the math a while ago. A one-time payment of about $25 billion would do it. That's the net present value of the treaty payments for First Nations in Alberta. I bounced that off a couple of my First Nations friends and said, would you accept that deal? You get your reserves, you get a $25 billion trust fund, and you become equal citizens to everyone else. Their answer is, yes, we would take that deal. So I think along Bruce's line, it's a negotiation, it's a discussion, but one thing I am not willing to negotiate is multi-level citizenship at all, ever.
We do have broad agreement on this. I think respecting the treaties is very important, but the treaties are with the Crown. So as has been said by Keith Wilson and others, if the individual tribes, bands want to say, you know what, we don't want to have anything to do with you. Cool, you're still on your Crown Reserve land and you're administered by the Canadian federal government, fine. But as far as equal rights, I respect Indigenous Canadians too much, especially Indigenous Albertans, to say, oh, you're a lesser category of person, or you need to be hived off and kept off from full participation in the life of Alberta. Indigenous people are quality people who have the right to be heard and to be engaged and to have their own property, their own lives, their own ability to be just as Albertan as anybody else. The same way as whether you've just been an immigrant and moved in or whether you've been here for 5 generations, you have the right to be an Albertan. So the equality thing is vital. Equality before the law, no matter who you are and what's happening, is a fundamental principle that we do deeply all agree on.
That may be the only time we have this much agreement, by the way. So the next one is a very long one here, but I broke it down. Hopefully I got the spirit of it. And it's about handling corruption in the Constitution. So we got the US as an example, we've got Canada as an example, and then Bruce with Libertarian, we don't really have an example yet. But starting over here with Matt, how would you handle corruption? Because as you saw and as you advocate for, the Westminster system was taken over by Trudeau and corrupted.
Yeah. Corruption will happen in any system. Get used to this. People aren't always good. Bruce is the first to believe that. I do believe that there are honorable people and that you can have a system with honorable people. At the end of the day, we as Albertans are the check and the balance against corruption. Corruption will happen. Keep your eyes open, and when it does, vote the buggers out and prosecute them. But what happens right now, you can clap for prosecuting corrupt people. I'm okay with that. What happens right now is when you commit petty theft, you go to jail. When you commit massive theft as a politician, you get a board membership and you retire on the proceeds. We need to change that. And there was a time when that was the system. If you were corrupt, then you did get in prison. And nobody should be above the law. That's one of the great principles of Runnymede, is that even the king is not above the law.
I'm at the discussion we had on Jason's show a few days ago. At the end, I said we have to get better quality people in government, and Bruce rightly said that we got to put the system in place that makes sure we deal with people who are not good. I think we're all in agreement. Bad people exist. They will try and get into government. They will try and wreak havoc and profit from the system. Now, I think there's multiple ways at this. One, for sure, is a fair trial followed by a fair hanging. But there's other means in my mind, and that's what's written in the draft constitution, is the whole idea of we limit the opportunity for people to profit from office. We don't let them sit as politicians for decades and decades. We have ways to recall them from average citizenhood. So you don't like your politician, you can recall them. There's tools such as that we could build in to pull these people out and replace them with better ones. And I think it's important that we look at those tools and put them in place. And then, probably the last key to the puzzle is a judiciary that does not cater to politicians.
I think about this a little bit differently. I understand the inclination. The inclination is you want to keep people accountable when they do wrong. Fair. But the real problem is that what they do under the present system is generally legal, not illegal, because they control the state. So that which we are complaining about as being corrupt, it is in a sense that they are behaving in a way that we don't approve of. But it is not corrupt in the illegal sense. You can't prosecute them for not having breached a criminal code offense, and they get to define what the offenses are. So I don't think accountability works. The better solution for me is to have a government that is essentially powerless. Corrupt people have no interest in a powerless government. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to take. There's no powers to exercise. You want to make the levers of power unattractive, and so you make them very small. And you do also what Dennis described, which is you make tenure very short. In other words, you diffuse power, and you make sure that the people who have their hands on power don't have their hands on very much. So a small government solves a lot of this. And I have to emphasize that the main problem we suffer from right now is that so much of what our governments do is, in fact, legal. That's the problem. It's not that people are breaking the law. It is that they are making the law in the way that they want.
Next question. Is there a feasible and ethical way to screen out ignorant voters without being the predictive folks when there are too busy, without productive folks when they are too busy with kids and study politics? So basically asking, should voters be educated, and is there a way to kind of screen out the uneducated voters? We'll start with Dennis. Lots of chuckle.
Well, first of all, there's no, back to the one person, one vote. I think all people get a vote. I don't think anyone should judge whether this person's capable or that person's capable. I think we all get one vote. But I think there are some things around the Constitution and around this discussion that have to be considered. First of all, I think we woefully prepare our children and ourselves for the political discussion. I remember when I was learning how to drive, a RCMP officer sat in the car with me and said, "This is an activity that will kill you. You better learn to do it right." Well, in much the same way, politics is an activity that can corrupt you, corrupt people, take away your money, make your life miserable, ruin your freedom, so we better learn to do it right. So I think things like mandatory civics in school, I think education across the board, and I tend to also vote for, if you don't vote, we're going to put a fine on you. Show up and vote.
Oh dear. My problem with that, I understand the sentiment. The problem with that is now we are coercing people, saying you must do this under penalty of the law because we think it's a good idea. Let's go to my principle that I didn't get a chance to describe. The people of Alberta, or many of them, thankfully, are saying they want to be free. Question: what is that? Now you might get different answers from different people. Here's my answer. You are free if you are not being coerced by other people. That is, you are not subject to the force or threats of force from other people, whether it's your fellow citizens or people inside the state. They are not making you do things that you don't want to do, and not preventing you from doing things that you do want to do. And vice versa. You can't use force against them either. And if that's a principle that we like, that's the first rule of the Constitution. Now we've just established a principle. If you then create a rule that says you must vote, you've just breached the principle. And to the idea that we would like citizens to have a certain minimal amount of, I don't know, education, experience, resources to vote, well, I understand the sentiment, but now we are preferring things ourselves. And we haven't decided who is going to exercise the power to make the call about who it is that gets to vote, about who gets the power. I mean, you're now in a chicken or egg thing. How do you resolve that? You resolve it by leaving people alone and giving everybody what we just said a few minutes ago, which is the equal protection of the law. That includes one vote per person.
We do have certain screening that is okay. We should screen out criminals. You know what? If you have broken the law and have been judged and you are now in jail, you should not be able to vote. You have violated your duties as a citizen, you lose the rights of a citizen. Beyond that, you know, certain people are not mentally capable. We get that, we understand that. There's a certain age limit. We say, hey, you got to be an adult before you vote, even though people would like to make it that all the kids can vote too. Hey, who wants free candy? I vote for you. Okay. In ancient Greece, they didn't allow actors to vote. There's a fun one. Maybe we should do that. I don't know. But actually, fundamentally, I agree with what Bruce is saying, that it's not our job to force a vote, but it's also important that where we are at right now is universal suffrage. If we come in and we say, hey, we're going to change that and only these people get to vote, that's great until a new government gets elected who doesn't like you and they decide that you're not the kind of person who should be able to vote. In recent events, when there was an unnamed virus of unspecified origin going around, there were people who would have said that many of us in the room were not considered eligible to vote because we were clearly mentally unfit. So we should be careful what we wish for when we want to limit who gets the vote in any society.
That's why we're having these conversations, because sometimes something sounds like a good idea on paper, but when you hash it out, it gets more difficult. Just so you know, some of yours have been answered already. So some of you had similar questions to what's been answered already, but great questions and comments and input here. So thank you all very much for that. And I'm still going through the list. Okay, this is normally what I say for the end, because we did this on the end of the show. But for each of you, name one pro and one con for each of your colleagues' constitutions. Let's start with Bruce. Without force, Bruce. Without force.
All right, well, so I'm going to contrast the other two models because, in a way, one of the weaknesses that I would identify are opposites to each other. Matthew's model is a model of legislative supremacy, meaning that the legislature, the elected MPs who sit in Parliament, have the last word. And what they decide is the law. The legislature can legislate anything. In contrast to Dennis's model, which includes rights, constitutional rights. What do rights mean? Well, in the constitutional context, a right is a limit beyond which the legislature cannot go. And in order for Dennis's model to work, you have to give power to the courts. Right? So Matthews is a legislative model, and to that extent, Dennis's is a judicial model. And those problems are opposites, right? But they're both problems, because in both cases you have given an institution the power to decide what will be. Right? The difficulty, for my money, with the legislative supremacy is this. Democracy is good. It's valuable. But democracy and freedom are not the same thing. And in many situations, they conflict. Right? So let's go back to COVID. If during a COVID period, the legislature says, everybody will get a vaccine upon penalty of prison. If that's what the legislature says, that's the law. No questions asked, no court cases, no rights, nowhere else to go. The legislature has the last word, period. It is democracy, it is not freedom. On the other hand, we have rights, or we claim to have rights right now in the Canadian Charter. We had them during COVID. The legislature said certain things. People went to court and said, hey, what about the rights? And the courts mostly said, no, sorry, not in this case. So this is not a perfect solution to the problem either. Did I answer the question?
Is there anything positive about either one?
Well, right. What's the alternative? Oh, no, I'll get to that later, because that invites me to talk about my model. I'm not allowed to do that just right now. Both of these versions, this is the positive thing, both of these versions are improvements on what we have. Because what we have right now is a mess, right? We have legislative supremacy sometimes in some areas, and we have charter rights that create a sort of judicial supremacy. The courts are overreaching, they're making policy, they think they're in charge, the legislature thinks they're in charge, and so rather than have one model or the other, we have just a total mess. And all three branches of government right now are more or less on the same page. The checks and balances don't work, and you got a mishmash. Either one of these models would be better than that.
Matt?
That was amazing, Bruce. He said something nice. I love it. No. If I want to say one picture of Bruce's system that makes it great, it's the paint your face half blue, brave hard, freedom! That's the advantage, no joke. If you want to maximize freedom and you get to like start from the ground up and you don't have anything existing, it's great. Maximal freedom, right? We can all just do what we want to and get along and sing kumbaya. The downside, to my mind, is chaos. That when you don't have enough government, you do create problems. Now, enough government and all the government are two different things, and that's what we see in Canada today. So Bruce's model would definitely be an improvement on what we have, but I would maybe suggest a little different one. With Dennis's, the advantage is the constitutional precision, right? To have a constitutional republic means that you're creating a carefully crafted document that's going to attempt to solve the problems and answer the questions. Done in good faith with good motivation, it could have a good result. The downside is, like Bruce was saying, judicial supremacy, where now who gets to adjudicate what they meant when they said? You know, we see this in the States now where you have originalists and then you have living tree type people who are trying to say, well, yeah, but what the framers of the Constitution actually meant was the opposite. So the problem is it creates a judicial supremacy that then has a danger of controlling, just like we do today with our courts.
So I'm going to try and answer the question without backhand downsides to my esteemed colleagues. So what I like about Bruce's model, and this is me as a theoretical physicist looking at something and saying, what a beautiful, elegant solution to a complex problem. It's absolutely sweet in its elegance and its simplicity, and that by itself is of great merit. And if it wasn't so, I wouldn't be even talking about it at all, but I do like its purity. In terms of Matt's Westminster approach, I realize that change is difficult for everybody. And the smaller the change we can make and still move us forward is actually got a better chance for success than turning the whole world on its head. So I like the fact that much of what we have today can be kept, hopefully all the good parts, and we just get rid of the bad parts. So that's what I like about the approach advocated by Matt.
What's the downside?
What's the downside? You can criticize.
Well, okay, I didn't want to criticize, but these guys nagged me into it. Well, what can I say here? So the problem with Bruce is we have this thing called reality. You know, in this beautiful theoretical world we're all sitting into tonight, that's fine. But my neighbor's dog won't stop barking. And I don't want to go out and shoot it. I don't want to shoot my neighbor either. I don't have to take him to court. I don't have to pay for lawyers. I don't take time off my job. I want someone to stop the freaking dog. And as soon as Bruce starts writing that in his Constitution, he's on that same slippery slope I'm at with the Constitution I've been writing. So I get that. The problem with Matt's approach, the issue I see there, is that I don't like kings. I have a number of intelligent friends whose children I consider complete idiots. And I would hate to have that model replicated as a core part of our future life.
So Dennis likes queens. Okay, no kings. And I like how I don't get picked on. This is good. I like to. All right, so for all three models, morality and Judeo-Christian values have framed the foundations of our Western civilization. How would your form of government and constitution respect and honor God? Its morality for drafting legislation required? To keep it easy for you guys, all right? Matt, first.
Yeah, it's an unpleasant fact for some people that Western civilization was founded on a Christian principle. And you can actually have a basic founding principle without everyone being forced at gunpoint to believe in the God or the faith that's involved. The principles of Western civilization are excellent, and they do require a moral population and moral government. It's when we go back to talking about corruption, it's not merely lawfulness, but the corruption of the honor or the dignity or the morality of the person making the decisions. We don't want scumbags making our laws. So there should be a way to incorporate that, and I do believe the Westminster system actually has that. We call them the honorable members. Right now we cringe when we say it, but because there is that principle that one should be an honorable person. And that was actually one of those fundamental principles that we used to care about in who we elected. That's actually on us. That's not about our system. That's on us saying, well, what do you do? Politicians are scumbags. So we have to actually return ourselves to requiring more of the people that we elect into positions of office.
I think Matt is right that the record shows that Western civilization was built by Christian people. I don't think that's in dispute. I think constitutions can reflect those principles. But I don't think it goes any further than that. If you identify what those principles are, and then you build the Constitution on them, isn't the job done? I don't think that you need or you should need to go looking for, and this refers back to the comment that Dennis made a few minutes ago. If you need to go looking for the right people to run your government, in the sense that if you choose badly, things will go to pot. If you depend upon having moral and honorable people in positions of power, then your Constitution does not work. Because there are all kinds of people out there who are neither moral nor honorable. John Adams famously said that the U.S. Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. And then he said, I think I'm paraphrasing, but he said, it is not suited to any other. And let's use that as a piece of evidence. That is not the people that they have right now. And it is not working. In other words, that Constitution, which is the best one around, even that one does not work now, because the people cannot be counted on to be moral and religious and honorable. Our leaders, your leaders in Alberta, from time to time are bound not to be honorable and moral. And your Constitution has to work anyway. If it doesn't, the Constitution does not work.
So I agree greatly with both Matt and Bruce. I think the principles that came from Christianity are in fact the basis for our Western civilization, but you don't need to be religious to understand those and adhere to them. So one of my key things is I'm a person of faith. I want freedom of religion, but I totally understand people who want freedom from religion. And that should be allowed in the country as well. So over-embedding one particular theology in things like a constitution or government is not something I agree with, even though I speak as a person of faith. So I think we have to keep it simple, focus on the real matters around freedom, around what rights do we have, what does government do, what does it not do, and not get into a religious debate. I will add one more thing. I've been talked to by a number of my friends who said, well, we should set up a Christian political party. And I said, the thing I fear most in this world is a theocracy. I fear that more than any secular government, because they have an ideology that justifies what they're doing. So I think we have to focus on the principles and focus on making sure it's fair to all, regardless of what they believe.
Okay. So the next little group here that I have are kind of suggestions, not so much questions. So this person wants to see a direct democracy, referendums like Switzerland, elected Senate, elected judges, our own police force, limited armed forces. Let's start with those ones. Let's go with Dennis. So we have referendums like Switzerland with some direct democracy, elected Senate, elected judges, a police force, and limited armed forces.
Okay, the parts I agree with is elected Senate is a no-brainer. I think the how you select judges is a more nuanced thing. I go back and forth between electing them, but that has to be a very limited list, because you don't want me as a judge, for example. I don't understand the law, and I probably get too grumpy. So I think there's some discussions, and this is where I begin to enter into the constitutional conference discussion, because these are the kinds of questions we want decided after looking at the three models, after understanding what the people want, and say, what do we want for a Senate? What do we want for how do we pick judges. What kind of military do we want? While we're writing the transition plans, I'm going to pick on some of my military friends, and they want to set up the military today. They want to start buying F-35s tomorrow. And I said, no. That's not our job. That is the job of the future government to select what role the armed forces should be, what they should be composed of. Are they professional? Are they volunteer? Are they militia? Is there compulsory service, and so forth? So I tend to want to leave those questions until after we have a government based upon our new constitution that can make those determinations.
Elected Senate, yes. Elected judges is my preference, yes. I want to add in something that I think Dennis and I agree about, which is, and maybe Matthew as well, I'm not sure. I've suggested that not just term limits are important, but term limits to this extent. I've suggested that nobody can work for the state in any capacity, cumulatively, for longer than, pick a number, 6 or 8 years. So in other words, if you run for office twice, 2 terms of 8 years, you're done. Can't be a judge, can't be an ambassador, can't be a consultant, can't be a supplier, you're done. If you work as a bureaucrat for 8 years for the state, you're done. No judgeship, no running for office. In other words, we want a revolving door. What you're trying to avoid is an established ruling class. A set of people with interest embedded in the state. You're trying to avoid a deep state, right? There may be moments where direct democracy is appropriate. I mean, we're in one right now. A referendum for independence is entirely appropriate. But as a general practice, here's why. Direct democracy is the purest form of democracy. So what is wrong with that? What's wrong with that is you are giving control to the majority. That means if you are in the majority, if you are in the minority, you now are not free. Let's take an example. If during COVID we had direct democracy and these policy questions were put to the population, should everyone be required to get a vaccine? Vote, everybody. If 60% of the population said yes, then you must get a vaccine. No rights involved, people. This is democracy. That's what direct democracy means. The people decide. If the people get it right, then we're good. If the people get it wrong, then you are in a lot of trouble. So I think we need to distinguish between two things which are conflated. People talk about a free people, but they mean it in the collective sense. A free people being able to choose their leaders. That is to be contrasted with free individuals who cannot be told what to do by their fellow citizens. This is one kind of situation in which democracy and freedom conflict. If you have direct democracy for an awful lot of your policy questions, then you are going to run into a situation where you do not live in a free country.
We call him Coldwater Bruce for a reason. Matt?
How many people are big fans of Pierre Elliott Trudeau? Rachel Notley? Adolf Hitler? All elected. Do elections always fix your problem? Does electing everybody always solve your problems? No, it actually doesn't. There's actually a role for democracy, elections, electing certain people. There's also a role for appointing people. I'm actually all in favor of an appointed Senate. You know what? It would be great if the Senate did its job. Sober, second thought. When the elected politicians stand up there and they come to you and they say, I'll buy everybody a boat if you just vote for me. And then they go to do the boat buying bill, and the Senate says, you're dumb. No. That would be great. An appointed Senate, the way it was set up, was actually a means of slowing down. It was like a sea anchor. It slowed down the change to ensure that no dramatic things would happen. There's a place for that. You know what? I want certain people appointed. When I'm going and I'm getting my brain operated on, I don't want a democracy where everybody just gets to vote on who's going to be my brain surgeon because they're going to pick someone with a chainsaw. That's how much they like me. So we want to make sure that we actually do have times where we have specialists. By the way, who likes Ralph Klein? Oh, I do anyway. He was in for a long time. One of our best premiers, Ernest Manning, 25 years. He just kept getting elected. Term limits are great until you lose the great people. Winston Churchill, Margaret Thatcher, both of whom I really like. They were in longer than the term limit would have allowed. These things don't necessarily solve it. Direct democracy, like Bruce said, you actually end up with the tyranny of the majority, and our system was actually designed to preserve the rights and the privileges of the minority amongst the majority. So I would say we have to be cautious about throwing everything to an election. Yes, you'll solve some problems, but you just might create problems you didn't know you didn't have.
All right, the next one is, where do you stand on the boat bill? Oh, wait, you covered that already. All right.
I'm against the boat bill.
So no boat for everybody, okay. The criminal penalties included in the Constitution for politicians that breach their oath of office. And another suggestion here is limit the size of the public service to no more than 20% of the population. Let's go ahead and start with Matt. That's huge to me.
That's huge.
Work? 20%. 20%.
Question, so there's part of your answer, so go ahead, Bruce. The first one was criminal penalties for breach of oath for politicians, oath of office, and then limit to 20%.
So the first one is a suggestion that I've heard a lot. But it does beg the question, what do you mean? Right? Because some people mean that if politicians lie to us, then we get to prosecute them or punish them in some way. Okay? That is a terrible idea. Terrible idea. Politicians are there to lie to you. Politicians lie to you because it works, because people vote for them when they lie. You should expect politicians to lie. In fact, that should be the starting assumption. If everybody understood that politicians lie, and you had a constitution that didn't care, because it doesn't matter, because it works anyway, then there's no need for this kind of witch hunt. Right now we have a problem because those people are running things. They really are running things, and they're running things into the ground. So it's understandable that we would want accountability. But we shouldn't have people with that kind of power. If you don't have people with that kind of power, then, I mean, I don't even know what kind of oath you'd want them to take. I don't really believe in oaths in that sense, and I don't believe that we should count on politicians telling the truth. I'm perfectly fine with them with the assumption that they're not. If they have not much power anyway, it doesn't matter. That's my answer to that. 20% is much too high. There's no number. There's no number. So let me tell you about my default. Okay, my model has a default. Here's the default that exists. All the constitutions that you know, ours in Canada, the American, and probably any other one that you've run into, has a default position, a starting premise. And that premise is that the state has power over everything. Now, when I say the state, I mean all of its bits. I mean provinces and federal government, I mean legislatures and bureaucracies and courts. All of the state together has unlimited jurisdiction over every subject matter. And then what do? We describe or claim to exceptions. All powerful except. And the exceptions are, for example, charter rights. You can do anything you want except you can't infringe freedom of speech. And sometimes that's real and sometimes it's not. Okay? That's the default position. I want to flip the default. The flipped default goes like this. The state has power to do nothing. Except. Now, what are the exceptions? The state is powerless, except what do you want the state to do? We want to have a state for something. What are they? Number one, you want them to keep the peace. You want them to enforce that rule that I mentioned before, which is nobody can use force. Nobody can make threats. You want to be able to call the police when your neighbor is threatening you or stealing your car or polluting your land. That is all an exercise of force. Okay, keep the peace. Number two, resolve disputes. You want to have a court system when your neighbor builds a fence over your backyard. And number three, protect the country. You want a military, you want borders. 1, 2, 3. Keep the peace, resolve disputes, protect the country. And very little else. Maybe there's something that you add to the list, but what they do not have is a mandate to provide for the common good, the general welfare, the public interest. The state does not have the mandate to provide for the common good. Because here's what happens when they do. They put your interests and rights aside because they're in the way of what they think is the common good. A flipped default. But if you had a state that was limited to those kinds of exceptions, then it wouldn't be 20%. I don't know what the number would be, but it would be very, very small. It would be essentially powerless and uncorruptible.
It's interesting when Bruce and I agree. It happens actually quite often. As Bruce was going through and saying, look, the government has no power except for, that's actually the exact structure in the constitutional draft. The difference is Bruce's is more limited. One of the things I believe in is that the government should do as little as possible, and I do agree completely with Bruce, is that none of this common good crap, none of this, we will judge your rights under the guise of what's good for the nation. You have rights, you don't have them. So while our structures are different and the approach comes from a different direction, believe it or not, there's actually elements where you would probably hold up Bruce's future constitution and the one that I have in my inbox and say, look, there's actually some similarities here. So that's part of it. The other thing I think we're going to be in violent agreement on is government spending. I don't know what the right number is, but I think of what is the absolute least amount government can do and government can spend. What's the smallest number? What's the fewest number of people? And the way to do that is don't give them much to do and put pressure on them to become efficient. One of the differences between the private sector and the public sector is the private sector has the profitability pressure. If you're not making money for your shareholders, you're not making enough, there's pressure to improve things, improve costs, build better mousetraps, sell them at a better price. So all those things are true in the private sector. Public sector has none of that. Well, how do you squeeze that out of the public sector? Limits. You can't have any more money than this. One of the models we have in the constitutional draft is to say, take the previous year's 5 GDP, no fictional projections, and say, you get maximum this many % of the previous 5 years' GDP to spend. That's it. If you can't make it work, cut some spending to make room for the next thing you want to do. So there are models that can work. I think there is some growth together between Bruce and I on some things, but clearly we all are aligned with small government, the least we can possibly make it.
And we do all actually align on this. I agree that government should be as small as possible, as Dennis said. We might disagree on where that line is, but the fundamentals, again, going back to the old Westminster system, Bruce is secretly just a 12th century Westminster type person, Don't tell him that, he might get offended. But the idea that used to be present was government should live of its means. And the role of the House of Commons was supposed to be coming together and saying, no, you can't have more taxes. No, you're not allowed to spend more money. No, figure it out, but you're not getting any more of our money to do your stupid stuff. And then we put the inmates in charge of the asylum, and now their job is to say, should we have more money? Yes, we should have more money. Let's tax people. I think that's a great idea. We should have a raise all around. And that's what we've created in our broken system. So the principle that government should live of its means, that we should give government a set amount, like Dennis says, of the GDP, and say, figure it out, you don't get any more of ours, is healthy for everyone. What was the other part?
He was a bit of an actor there. So no vote for you under the Republic, right? Okay. A few more suggestions here. One I think we've covered a few times. The right to own your own property and keep your property safe. Be in control of your own life. Do no harm. The right to bear arms. Let's start with Dennis.
I think property rights are way up there with freedom of speech. And property includes firearms. And I've owned firearms since I was 11 years old. So far I haven't shot anybody, despite temptation from time to time. But the guts of it is, I drive a vehicle that can kill someone. I have medication in my cabinet that could kill someone. I have a firearm in my gun case that could kill someone. Why should one be differentiated against? So I think that's the way it should be. Also, one more thing in terms of property rights. I'll tell you one thing I absolutely hate in terms of taxation: taxes on property. If I were a king, and I know I hate them, if I were a king, I think number one or number two on my list would be get rid of property taxes across the board.
So the principles of the Glorious Revolution were life, liberty, those sound familiar, and property. That these are the rights that you have that even the king can't take away. And property for them included your money, because that is your property. The government does not have the right to just take your property. Sometimes there's a good reason why they can come to you and say, hey, in order to do this thing called the national project, in order to fight this war, in order to build this dam, we need to band together and do something. Will you consent, which is what the Commons were originally for, to give us some of your property that we may do this great national work? And we could say yay or nay. But we've shifted that now to where the government inherently has the right to your property through taxation, and any time they dang well please, they can raise the taxes and all you can do is complain. That's not the way it's meant to be in a Westminster system, classical, the old style. And that's what I'm talking about, is let's take those principles and reintroduce them into our life. The government is not God, and it's not your boss.
These are things that in substance the three of us agree about. More things that we agree about. The difference is not in the substance of the question, but in the architecture of the design. I've mentioned to you what I think would be my first principle. If you're going to be free people, that means you're not subject to force. If you're not subject to force, that means the state can't use force to tell you what to do, other than not to use force. If they can't use force, they can't have any other laws that tell you what to do, because that's what laws are. Without force, there is no law.
And that's actually a wise principle. So there are things where we can say, hey, you guys go in the legislature, figure it out. You worry about the budget bill. I don't want to go line by line through it. But there also is a time when we need to be engaged. And what I would say is, if you want direct democracy in the best way, the vote is downstream of where you need to be. We need people who are engaged in the actual political life of our country, and that means being involved in every step of the political process, not merely showing up on a vote. And then you do get healthier government.
All right, we still got a lot here, but we got about 40 minutes. So I'm going to do my best to pull them all out. A lot of yours have been answered already, so if you didn't hear me directly answer or ask yours, it's been addressed already. Lots about bear arms. So people want bear arms. Make sure bear arms, all right? You're all for bear arms? Bear your arms. You're all good? Yeah. What does freedom mean to each speaker tonight as they apply it to Alberta independence? Let's start with Dennis. Or did I start with you last time? Yeah, Bruce, please.
I think I've answered this question already, but let me reiterate. Freedom to me means you are not being coerced by other people. Those other people are your fellows and the people in the state. The one exception, of course, is if you use force against other people, well, then we'll call the police on you. Then you can be pushed around. But if you are not interfering with other people, if no force or threats of force being used against you, that you are a free person. And as soon as we breach that idea, now you are no longer free. And it's very easy to slip from one to the other because, well, what harm would a little bit of taxes do? The harm is now you've broken the principle. If you start with that, you got to stick to it. And you got to mean what you say. And for those people who say they want to be free, here you go. If you don't like it, maybe you don't really want to be free after all.
In relation to Alberta independence, it's about the right to self-determination and responsible government. Albertans should be free to govern themselves without interference from Ottawa or any of the other provinces. And we want the other provinces to have the same rights for themselves. Freedom in relation to independence is the ability to govern ourselves completely.
So I must admit at times I feel very overmatched by a university professor in constitutional law and a guy with a PhD in it. And I think of myself as just a citizen. For me, freedom is just leave me alone. Hear, hear. Let me do my thing. I won't do anything stupid. Don't you guys do any stupid things in government either. Just leave me alone.
I don't know how to call on Dennis anymore now, so I'm going to do my best to leave you alone. How will a new constitution be implemented and who decides? How will Alberta decide if we become a republic, stay part of the Commonwealth, etc.? So how do we do this process? Let's go ahead and start with Matt.
It's another one of those things that might be uncomfortable for some, but it starts with the Alberta government. They are the lawful government of Alberta. So they are the ones actually who will make those decisions. We can talk about our ideals, we can talk about what we want, but it is the government of Alberta that will make those choices. And that's why it's important that we be engaged in the present government of Alberta, in the present parties that are governing all that, because they will have a responsibility and they need to hear from us, know what we think, and be ready to answer those things. Because I can sit here and I can say, oh, well, it'll be this, it'll be that. I'm a private citizen. I have no standing or no power to influence the government on what they do should a referendum be in favor of independence.
Bruce, without power, can you let that other guy know? I'm looking for an answer.
I sure didn't catch that last part.
Can you let this guy know? I don't want to bother him. Just leave him alone. Let him know it's his turn.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest obstacles. It's exactly like Matthew said. The people in power right now are the ones with the mandate to decide how this moves forward. That is one of your biggest problems, because those people have told you explicitly they are against this. So there is no guarantee about what happens, even if you win a referendum, even if you win the first one especially, because that's not the real one. Because now you have to hope that you'll get a second one sometime, someday. And then if you happen to win that one, if the same people are still in power, and that's a big if, then you've got people with the power who don't want to do this. And to add insult to injury, I'm just going to add in the thing about that. Last December, the UCP introduced Bill 14, which reformed a number of statutes, but including the Referendum Act. And it added a section to Section 4 of the Referendum Act. It said, I'm going to paraphrase, if the province holds a constitutional referendum, which is what an independence referendum is, that is otherwise binding, the government does not have to implement the results. So even if you win the first referendum and you get a second one, and then you win the second one, you are still not guaranteed a result. People have been talking about such things as, well, you know, if worst comes to the worst, we can just make a unilateral declaration of independence. And that could be true if you enter into negotiations and the government of Canada refuses to play ball. Then yes, that is a theoretical possibility, but the only person who can do such a thing is the Premier. So unless you have a Premier in power at that moment who's inclined to that, that never happens. So there is a big political obstacle facing you right now on this path.
Yeah, I guess they're not going to leave me alone after all, so that's okay for this. This is important. I mean, what Matt and Bruce said is right on. Bruce covered the law properly, and there's a lot of risks around the track we're on with Danielle Smith and so forth that we all worry about. But there's another factor here, and that's everyone in this room. All the people are going to vote. If we show up to vote, if we vote in favor of both referendums, let's say we get the 60%, which is sort of my dream. We're now a force that can't be ignored. We're now a force that literally can walk into Danielle's office, or at least to the legislature building, and say, look, we represent the third-party advertisers, the various groups that have been doing all this. We have had open houses like this one to hear ideas. And you can't just shut us out and do whatever the heck you want, because a big chunk of your voters, the ones that elected you, are the ones that want to see this change happen. I think they're going to respond to that kind of thing. And if they don't, I think that's the moment in time where we say, okay, it's time to use the system to get new leaders.
A shameless plug. My wife and I sat down with Danielle Smith today to ask these questions, and we'll be putting that online tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., 7:30, she'll jump on. But we were basically asking what happens October 20th, and we went through the various options with her. So go ahead and check that out. And Bruce's analysis of the law, he's 5-0 right now. He's very, very good at reading, interpreting, and then explaining the law. So Bill 14 is something you guys should be paying attention to. Next one here. How will the Constitution protect Albertan culture? We have a large number of temporary and permanent residents who do not wish to assimilate and dilute the native population. Is there a way to protect the culture of Alberta? Let's go ahead with Dennis.
Well, what's culture? You ask yourself that. Culture is everyone in this room. It's what do we believe? What do we understand to be true? What do we chide our neighbor about when they do something dumb? When they build my much fabled 3-story purple chicken coop next to me. That's when we talk to them and say, that's not how we do things around here. I think we have to be braver at defending the things we believe to be true. We have to start talking to people who come here, whether it be on a temporary basis or permanent, and say, this is the way we do things around here, and not be apologetic about it. My wife is mainland Chinese. We've been married for close to 10 years. Believe me, we have had some very sporting conversations about how things are done in China versus how they're done in Canada. The good news is she's a smart lady, way smarter than me, even though she made one huge mistake in marrying me. Other than that mistake, she is learning. She is actually saying, okay, this is the way things are done around here. And I think we have to be a lot braver and a lot, I wouldn't say pushier, but a lot more determined to say, this is what we believe in, this is how we work, this is how we live.
Would you say she matured in her thinking?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah? All right. Bruce, is there any room in the Constitution to protect culture?
I'm so glad Dennis started with that definition of culture, which I very much agree with. Culture is what people do. You shouldn't need law to protect your culture, except in this sense. You have a border. And what's happened in the recent past is that the people who control this managerial state of ours have opened the gates and invited a floodgate, a flood of people, too many, too fast. And that is affecting the culture for sure. So one of the questions to be asked for a future constitution is, how does the border work and who gets to be a citizen? And my answer is, well, the border is one of those exceptional things that your state has the power to do, but let's define in the Constitution who gets to be a citizen. And my answer is, and there's going to be a transition period here, of course. You start from where you are to this new situation, and maybe in the transition period you'll want some rules about people sort of deciding whether or not they want to be in Alberta or in Canada or vice versa. But once you've established the Constitution and the new country, then for my money, a citizen has got to be the offspring of a citizen. You can have visitors, people who visit your new country. You can have them temporarily if you want to have a law that allows for residence, okay? But to be a citizen, I think, in order to prevent bureaucrats and politicians from having control over your culture, which is what has happened now, you do not want people to have that kind of power. In order to prevent that kind of power, you have to define what a citizen is. A citizen is an offspring of a citizen. Period. That is the only way to become a citizen. And if that means, see, one of the rationales for having high degrees of immigration is that the culture that exists is not reproducing itself. The birth rate is too low. And if we define citizenship in the way I've described, people have said, but it's going to peter out. There won't be enough people. That is a possibility. In other words, procreate or perish, because that is your culture.
You may have just created a baby boom, and we've also have some flooding around here, so careful with those analogies, please. Yeah, thank you. Matt?
I have 10 kids, so at least I'm following that rule. My family line will not perish. There was not a debate over immigration not that long ago. Everybody just went, yeah, immigration's good. Why? We had basic standards, just what you're saying, where we chose who we allowed to join our society. Now, I don't actually agree in only birth, someone who's a citizen by birth because their parents were, because otherwise none of us except the Indigenous people would be citizens, because everybody except the Indigenous came from immigrants, right? Everybody came from somewhere else. So those people had to become citizens of this country, coming from Ukraine, England, Wales, France, wherever else you came from. And that's why we have the people we do today. So there has to be a path to citizenship. Now, that path, up until recently, was carefully controlled and involved joining the culture. It involved saying, we have a standard here, and we believe it's good, and if you moved here, you like the standard too, or you wouldn't have come. So we have to go back to that. It's not that long ago where this wasn't a problem. Let's just go back to where it was and not do anything crazy. Not that I'm calling Bruce crazy.
I'm glad there was no right to bear arms for a little part of that. There was some grunts on that part. Okay. Next one we have here, I think we've covered this a little bit, but let's just get it firm. We'll start with you, Matt. Would the Republic of Alberta still keep the king as the head of state, or would we be a constitutional republic like the USA?
First of all, a republic and a kingdom are two different things. So if you're the Republic of Alberta, you don't keep the king. If you're the Kingdom of Alberta, great. I actually like Dominion. It's a wonderful name that's really good. I think before we want to reject kings or even queens, we must understand the constitutional role of the monarch. We are not in an authoritarian monarchy. We are in a constitutional monarchy where the crown has certain reserved powers that are very useful, and it's an incredibly functional model. The king is not the source of any of the problems we're dealing with today in Canada. Ottawa is. They are two different things. The king did not come down here and force any of these bad laws and bad issues that we're dealing with. So let's keep the focus on what we're doing. And if in the new country of Alberta, the crown and the people want to separate and go their different ways in a lawful, orderly manner, that's fine. But I think we actually have something really good if we go back, not that long ago, to before Pierre Trudeau and continue on in the model that we had.
Well, I think I've made my position on kings and queens pretty clear, so I won't restate them. But one thing Matt and I have discussed, and that is one of the principles that underpins the Westminster system, is that the monarchy does represent sober second thought, last resort thought to protect the nation. There is value to that function. We're just disagreeing on how to execute it. I see it as some sort of oversight group or body within government that does that. Matt sees it more from the monarchy side of things. But I think the function is real and valuable, and it ought to be preserved. The question is exactly how.
A friend of mine told a story about being in a party in the UK where there were some Brits and some Americans. And they got to talking about the American Revolution, and the Brits in the room basically said, but why would you want to get rid of King George? He was such a good king. And the Americans said, well, you may have thought that he was a good king, but he was a king. As in, are you out of your mind? This is a hereditary ruler. You don't get ruled by someone who got in his position by birth. The king's function in our system, now it's to be sure, it is mainly now symbolic in terms of the person. The king himself does not exercise a great deal of power. But the crown exercises enormous power. And in our system, most people are not exactly sure who controls the crown. You know, is it the king? Is it the Privy Council? Is it the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office? Is it the cabinet? Is it what kind of role does the Governor General play? I mean, who is in control, and where does the buck stop? I'll tell you where the buck stops in the U.S. with the president. Everybody knows who that is. Everybody votes for him. He's responsible. If things screw up, it's his fault. In our system, nobody knows. It's one reason to get rid of the king. I'm sorry, Matt, it's another reason. And one reason that I'm not partial to the Westminster system. It's just not. In the Westminster system, one of its flaws, for my money, is that the same people control the legislative branch and the executive. Or we think. We're not exactly sure who pulls the strings. But the Prime Minister and the Cabinet tell their MPs how to vote in the House of Commons. And they have a significant role, of course, in directing the government, the ministries and the departments and so on. So unlike in the states where you have an explicit separation of powers, legislatures, Congress does this, the president and the executive does that, and the courts do this. Now, that separation is not working ideally either down there, but it's at least better than what we've got, because we got a mishmash of those two branches and it doesn't work.
So this could be why aliens don't come to Canada. Take me to your leader. We're not sure who that is. We're not sure who that is. The bankers. Oh, the banker is in charge of Canada now. There's a couple suggestions here. I think we covered one of them already, but I'll repeat it. Voting, must be a citizen, must show ID. Criminals lost this privilege when they commit crimes. Immigration, bring back point system. Quote, I was responsible for my husband for 10 years. Is this your brother? No, just checking. Yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, I mean, in the document, the value of freedom, a lot of that's spelled out, and that's what I believe, is that the point system Canada had was considered one of the best ever. We can quibble about how many points for what and what's the threshold and the cutoff and so forth, but that's the qualification step. The second thing is actually quotas. What does the nation need? Do we really need more people serving coffee? Or do we really need doctors and engineers and masons and so on and so forth? So I think there is a need for control on all those kind of things. Voting, if you're a citizen, that's it. No one else votes ever. And by the way, I have no problem with voter ID.
So this is another chance for us to, or a chance for me, to distinguish between our positions on substance and on design. I agree with both Matt and Dennis about how the immigration system worked before. The point system was good. It worked. It was managed well. It's good policy. That's not the question. The question is, who decides? Let me put it another way. The problem has become in this country not that we have bad policy. Don't get me wrong, we have a lot of bad policy. But the problem is not bad policy. The problem is the existence of policy. The problem is we have people with the power to make policy. The three of us can agree that the old system of immigration was good, and then we should have it back. The problem is we don't have the power to do that. That is a policy decision right now made by people in power. And the task for us is to make sure there are no such people who have the power to make that policy. And in order to do that, the rule has to be in the Constitution. And you can't have detailed rules in constitutions. It doesn't work because time's going to go on. And the detailed policy you described in the Constitution is going to get out of date for whatever reason. Who knows why? So you need a principle instead, which is why I'm describing what I think the definition of citizenship has to be. It's not ideal. It's not what I would do if I was in power making policy. But you have to settle on a definition that will last the test of time and cannot be interfered with by anybody who has ideas that are contrary to what you would like to see. And that's why I think it has to be done that way.
I agree, actually, with what's just said. Constitutions should be as limited as possible because constitutions can't easily be changed, right? If you're going to have a constitution, have it be the basics, and then have law in order to flesh out what that looks like so that it can be changed if it doesn't work. Because 200 years from now, when someone reads, everyone should be treated fairly, we would all agree with that, right? Well, they might look at it and go, oh, by now, 200 years later, fairly means that you must be beaten around the head and the neck. So, okay, well, the Constitution says you have to be beaten around the head and the neck. Definitions change, ideas change, understandings change, and more importantly, the adjudicators change. So we can't just say, well, this Constitution will be read as XYZ, because then they'll just interpret what XYZ means. So we have to make sure that there is not that constitutional ability to alter all these things.
I don't want to beat them around the head or neck, but maybe. Not always. All right, so this is more of a suggestion on messaging about independence, and we'll get you guys' input on this. The way to win independence is not pitching freedom. It's about individual prosperity, period. Craft a message accordingly. This is a prescription. I know which doctor provided this. It's more of a recommendation on how the messaging should be done, and let's get your input on this. We'll start with Bruce. The way to win independence is not pitching freedom. It's about individual prosperity.
It should not pitch freedom, it should pitch prosperity.
Yep.
All right. See, I think the opposite. I don't think it has, prosperity, of course. You're going to be a much wealthier country than you are a province. And I think there's no sense in denying that. But that's not the reason to become independent. If that's the reason, this is an utter waste of time. Right? If this is about the numbers, then there's nothing underneath. This is about your civilization. This is about your liberty. And if that message does not resonate with enough Albertans to make them want to be independent and free, then this is not the time for this. You can't win this with numbers. And the numbers against you don't matter either. These are all very short-term things. How much will it cost to transition from a province to a country? Okay. Who cares? That'd be my take.
Well, I'm going to jump around a bit to the value of freedom conversation because people have asked me, what about this number, and is it 25 billion or 45 billion? And I'm with Bruce. I don't really care. The only purpose of that document was to make the case that when we are independent, we are a financially or fiscally viable nation. That's all it was meant to do. What the numbers turn out to be or what they turn out to be. I'm a big believer that if I have maximum freedom to exercise my talents and creativity, apply my energies where I will, not have some of my earnings confiscated by a government, allowed to spend my money where I think it's going to do me the most good. If I have that maximal freedom, I'll get the maximal prosperity out of it.
I think this is a big issue, right? Numbers, like they say, don't matter. And a gilded cage is not pleasant. Just because we have a nice lifestyle and all the comforts of home doesn't mean we're actually free. And the issue all along has not been economics. Why are we mad about pipelines? It's not just because we want more money. It's that we should have the right to build anything we bloody well please in our province. It's ours. So why does someone else get to tell me I can't build the future of my children? That's a culture thing. In the East, maybe they want people to say, yes, you can, or no, you can't. But here, we have the right to do as we please and build our future.
So I'm sure you all heard that Danielle Smith put out there $400 billion will be the startup costs. Well, we asked her that question, where did that number come from? She said from the back of an envelope math, and she'll be providing more information in the future. So stay tuned for that. And she also promised to come back on to explain it to us when we get to that point in August. So stay tuned for that. For each gentleman, we'll start with Matt. And I think I can see Max over there with his volume thing with you. Yeah. Which country, like you described, exists today in a better functioning format that you're describing?
Say currently, even with all its problems, the UK Parliament does function better than ours. It's even also broken and has been since Tony Blair got a hold of it. I'm not looking at a present day country so much as Canada in the relatively recent past, because it's not actually about how another country functions. They have different cultures, et cetera, et cetera. Here in Alberta and in Canada, we can look back and see a time when the government worked. So rather than trying to rebuild or build something new, let's just go back to that place and start from there.
Bruce?
I'm not sure that I believe that anymore. I used to believe that we had something that worked that we lost. And now looking back on it, I'm not so sure anymore. I think maybe the ingredients for leading us to where we are now is up, we're always there. I think the U.S. works better than our country does, but they're in a lot of trouble too. And the reason that they're in a lot of trouble is that their constitution, even their constitution, does not prevent a managerial state, which is what they have, as we do. I mean, this is the case across the West now. Every country has one of these things. You might call it the nanny state, the welfare state, the administrative state. I prefer the label managerial state because that's what they do. They manage everything. They manage economy and speech and property and commerce and belief, etc., etc. The whole idea is control. It's control for control's sake. And if you do not have a constitution that prevents the creation and growth of a managerial state, you will get one. The American Constitution, and even ours, does not prescribe one. It's not provided for in our Constitution or the American. It's just not prohibited, prevented. And so we have one. And we have one, of course, in Alberta, too. And so one of the challenges here is not to recreate the American experience, because that won't do, but to start from scratch, to figure out how in Alberta to do, I've been saying it, to do two things. You want to do two things, and those two things must be accomplished with your constitution. Number one is to, obviously, to become independent, is to get Alberta out of Canada. But the more difficult one is to get Canada out of Alberta. And to do that, here's one of the challenges. To do that, Albertans, in designing a constitution and in so many other ways, Albertans can't think like Canadians. Think like Albertans. Because hopefully that's a different thing.
So, get Canada out of Alberta forever?
Yeah.
So when I get asked a question like this, I think I'm being asked to select the tallest midget. It's a bit like my answer, like which politician do you like? And my answer is none of them. I think they're subject to systems that I disagree with. They work in ways I disagree with. They're not working to my interests and so forth. So I don't actually like any of them. So what I do believe, and this is where I think all three of us agree, we have an opportunity with Alberta independence to craft a new way. I completely agree with Bruce. Get Canada out of Alberta. Whether we go down Bruce's path or Matt's path or the Constitutional Republic path I favor. I'm at the point I don't care. Let's make it Albertan. Let's make it our way. Let's make it a way we can live by.
Forget land acknowledgements. They were conquered just like they conquered other tribes. Define consultation doesn't mean veto. Not one group has a veto. So this is more about talking about where we're at now and some of the next steps that we're going to be taking. Does a certain group have a veto? And what's consultation mean going forward? Bruce, we'll start with you if you don't mind.
So according to the Supreme Court of Canada, who is the one that invented the duty to consult, so this is what happened. We had the Constitution patriated in 1982. At more or less the last minute, there was a campaign to add a section to the Constitution on Aboriginal rights. The first drafts did not include one. And that campaign was successful. So more or less at the last minute, they added Section 35. Section 35 is the section that guarantees existing Aboriginal and treaty rights. Existing meaning as of 1982. But since 1982, the Supreme Court of Canada has taken those words and reimagined, redefined, evolved, expanded the meaning of Aboriginal rights. And one of those expansions was the duty to consult. They have never been able to exactly describe what it is you have to do to satisfy the duty to consult. But it is held and owed by governments when they are going to do projects or developments that might conceivably affect either an established or prospective Aboriginal claim. It is not a veto, though. And one of the things that they have said explicitly, this is the Supreme Court itself, the Supreme Court has said this is not a veto. This is an obligation to have a discussion or discussions with the Aboriginal people who might prospectively be affected by the proposal. What we have developed now in Alberta is a situation where you're not allowed to ask a referendum question without having done a duty to carried out a duty to consult, which is nuts. This is not what has been described in the case law. That case is going to be appealed, but what you've been told about the role of that case is not quite correct. That case in which the judge said, well, sorry, duty to consult, you have to stop the petition process, that case is a case under the Citizen Initiative Act. That is the act under which the petition was made and the signatures were collected in the process to get to a referendum. That process has been halted. Today, they agreed to allow the signatures to be counted, yes?
To validate.
But that is all. Otherwise, it's still halted. Now, here's the story you've been told. That decision means that we're not allowed to proceed with an independence question on a referendum. Not true. The government has always had the ability to ask any question it wants on a referendum. I mean, after all, did they consult or get signatures for any of the 9 questions that have already been announced? No. They could have had an independence referendum anytime they wanted. But they are hiding behind this decision to suggest that now it requires this decision to be appealed and then probably appealed again, and we have a duty to consult, and so even if you happen to vote yes on the 10th question in October, well, it might be still quite a while before we get to an actual referendum. That's the story they're feeding. It's not true. It might be true, though. Here's what might happen. Let's just say that the Premier had said, you know what, this petition process has been halted by the court. We're not subject to that petition process. I'm announcing today that we're going to have an independence referendum question, a clear one, on its own in 2027. It might have been that Aboriginal leaders would take that to court too and say, well, there's also a duty to consult on that question. That would have been a new case under a different statute with a different judge. Then who knows? That judge maybe would have come to the same conclusion about a duty to consult. There's no guarantees. But if that judge did come to that conclusion, you know what they could do? They could consult. Doesn't take that long. If you had a referendum announced for 2027 on a standalone independence question, and you thought, and you were the government, you thought maybe we're going to be required to consult, let's just go ahead and do it. It won't take that long. Let's go consult with Aboriginal people about having a referendum. And then you do it, and it's done, and the referendum gets held on schedule. Easy, easy peasy. But that's not what they want to do. So you're getting the path that you have.
Yeah, and we asked her that question, so tune in tomorrow morning. And maybe there should be a duty to consult Bruce Pardy, so we can clarify all of this ahead of time. Matt?
The duty of to consult is to some extent manufactured. Our Indigenous Albertans have the right to be as respected, as valued, and as important in our society as every other Albertan. It's as simple as that. They are people who live in Alberta and therefore deserve respect and equality the same as us. There is no group in Alberta that should have a special status which allows them to veto any other group.
That's why I don't want to tell you what to do.
So, duty to consult. We're exercising that right here in this room. We're consulting you guys. I would love to have this exact session with Indigenous people. Go to a reserve, sit down. Not with their chiefs, not with their consultants, not with their lawyers. I've got a friend, Jacob, he's a First Nations person. He and I talk about a lot of topics. We disagree on a lot and agree on quite a few as well. I've asked him all this stuff. He feels consulted. So this is not complex. This is just something we do because we don't differentiate in the future Alberta between what color you are, what you believe, whether you were born Indigenous, whether you immigrated. We're all Albertans. We all have the right to be consulted, and ultimately we all have all the right to decide.
Hear, hear.
So if we didn't get to your card, don't worry. All the cards will be passed to the gentleman so they can take a look at them, add them to the notes, add them to their thinking, maybe mature their understanding a little bit. But we'll have a final thank you and good night from starting with Bruce.
Well, thank you all for coming. I really enjoyed it. Great questions, terrific questions. And thanks to my compatriots. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I'd like to echo what Bruce said. Thank you all for coming, but I have an ask. Right now, every one of you are carrying away a duty. Us three have had a chance to study and think and debate and answer your questions. You now have an obligation to talk to your friends, to talk to your families, to talk to your co-workers about what you heard tonight, the concepts that are espoused, and what it means to pick a constitution. So I'd ask you all to follow up on that duty. The three of us will continue to talk, we'll continue to answer, we'll continue to do what we can to further independence, but it's now all of us working on this.
I'd like everyone to thank Max. He spends a lot of time and goes to a lot of things out of the goodness of his heart in order to make sure that people can hear and see what's going on. I'd really like to thank Jason and everyone who's working with this for putting this on and bringing us together. I'd like to thank my good friends who get to disagree. I love to disagree, but with friends. And I want to thank you guys. You do matter. You are making a difference, and together we can make a massive difference in the future of Alberta.
I'd also like to thank the venue who didn't cancel us. Believe it or not, this is a difficult thing to get. freedom of speech, expression, and assembly was allowed today. So I thank that very much. Our volunteers, you can see them with the vests, the orange vests, and doing the coffee and everything. We also have a vendor in the back if you want to check out some of that good stuff. It's tallow-based, so enjoy that. And of course, I want to thank my wife and my family. Without them, this is impossible. So thank you all for being here tonight. You're an amazing audience. Make sure you share this out. It's online. Take care of yourself. Love you all very much, and God bless.
Let's hear the whistle stop.